The 11 plus is an umbrella term for an exam or type of exam that children do when they are in year 6 to get into a grammar school. Hi there, geekers. It's Joycelyn here. Oh my goodness. We have had so many messages, positive feedback, and so on ever since I did that interview with Lalu. You know, that amazing young man who has started at a top independent school, having successfully completed his 10 plus exams. And so lots and lots of questions have come. And I thought it would be good to do a follow-up video about the alternatives to the 11 plus. Let's begin with everything that children can do before the 11 plus to get into an independent school, and everything children can do if maybe they don't make the cut for the 11 plus. And obviously this would be applying to independent schools and grammar schools. So let's begin. All right, so just to give some background information for those who maybe don't really know what all this plus here, plus there is all about. The 11 plus is an umbrella term for an exam or type of exam that children do when they are in year 6 to get into a grammar school. That term has also found its way into the independent school domain, who conduct something called an entrance exam. Some of them do common entrance, some of them do a pre-test, and then the children sit another exam a couple of years later. Honestly, there are just so many different types, but basically the 11 plus is an exam that was created in 1944. If you want some history on it, Google the Butler Act. Butler as in, you know, the man that dresses up and he waits on somebody, you know, some rich person who has a butler to do his ironing, to help him dress, get his clothes together, do this, do that, and so on. Butler. You know, there was somebody in Parliament, you could say the education minister of the time, and with the government at the time, you know, this is going after the Second World War, or towards the end of it, looking for a way to, you know, really build the morale in the country. And one of the ways of doing this was to provide free education for all children. And so that meant they had to find a way to put children into the right schools for their academic ability. So some children went to grammar schools if they passed this exam called the 11 plus. Some children went to comprehensive schools, state schools, and other children went to what was called a technical college, where they would go and learn a trade. So let's just say, you know, if they wanted to become a blacksmith, a plumber, you know, all of those, even barbering, anything that is to do with the hands and having a craft of some sort that didn't require that academic background, like becoming a lawyer or a doctor, accountant, and so on, they would go to technical college. Now, so before we carry on with this amazing video, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so that you will get notified every time a new Geek School video goes up. Enjoy! The 11 plus used to be compulsory, but due to some interesting procedures, you know, very interesting procedures where children would pass and not get an offer of a place, girls in particular, people of colour, And those who maybe didn't come from what was deemed as the right part of society. So elitism was still playing then, probably more so than it is today. And so many parents started to get quite unsettled by the 11 plus exams because, you know, if all children sit this exam, there isn't a place in grammar schools for every child going into secondary. It's just not feasible. And if there were places for all of them, the exam would sort of become redundant to a degree. And so, you know, you probably hear stories sometimes of people who became very emotionally scarred because if they didn't pass the 11 plus, they could be labeled, you know, as just not being bright and some quite nasty terms and all of that type of thing. So in the 60s, there was quite a lot of, you know, pushback against the 11 plus exams, and many of them shut down. Can you imagine that at the moment we have 156 grammar schools in England? There used to be 1,300. Whew, that is a lot of schools shutting down. But anyway, the term has stayed. So now it's voluntary, you know. So in the 60s, between the 60s, from the 60s and so on, basically with every change of government, mainly the Labour government, under them, you know, many of these schools were shut down. And then in 1998, a bill was passed making it illegal for another grammar school to be open. Although there is a school in Kent that managed to open an entirely new school, calling it an annex, but we're not going to get political. So anyway, that's basically a very, very, very quick rundown of the 11 plus. So basically it was linked to grammar school entry, but the term now loosely, you know, covers the exams for grammar schools and independent schools. Now, grammar schools are basically state schools that are selective because of the tests that children do to get into them. However, independent schools are not state schools, hence the name independent. They are also called private schools, and they are known to be fee-paying schools. In other words, you know, to send a child there, generally you need to get your wallet ready to be paying a few thousand a term. But then they do have scholarships and bursaries. So they take children from all ages, and I'll go into that a bit. So primary independent schools, private schools, fee-paying schools are called prep schools, and they have children usually from like nursery or at least a reception year all the way through to at least year 6. Some schools go beyond year 6 and hold on to your darlings until year 8, where they do something called common entrance, a pre-test, which they will then do another test and then move on to secondary in year 9. Okay. But generally, primary finishes in year 6, and it's in year 6 that the children do the common entrance exams for independent schools. Okay. And it's also in year 6 that children do the grammar school selection test, the 11 plus. So basically the 11 plus takes place in year 6 in a very general term way of thinking. I hope you followed me so far. So we now move on to prep schools and their points of entry. So many prep schools do what they call the 7 plus. So the children sit the exam when they're in year 2. And if they're successful, they would start in the school in year 3, September of year 3. Some schools I've seen, they literally do a plus for everything. I've seen the 4 plus, 5 plus, 6 plus, honestly. 10 plus. Oh my goodness. It's no wonder why parents get confused. But basically, all of these pluses are just an exam in order for your child to get into the school if they score highly enough in the exam. Independent schools tend to interview every student. So it's not just about their academic ability, but it's a whole mix. You know, obviously they get school reports and all of that. So there's a lot of consideration there before a child is offered a place. And they also do in-year admissions where a child might be able to go and do like an assessment day, spend the day in the school. Generally, they are assessed with a test of some sort. And then where successful, you know, they're offered a place. That tends to happen if it so happens that the school has some vacant places. Right. So then we come on to the 10 plus, which is becoming increasingly more common because more and more parents are becoming aware of it. So the 10 plus is an exam that children sit in year 5, and where successful, they start at their new school in September of year 6. And it's possible that you can have a secondary school that just happens to have a building for the year 6s, just to sort of integrate them in before they start secondary in year 7. I know a number of schools like that. One such, Trinity in Shirley, you know, and so on. But basically, the 10 plus covers Key Stage 2. So when your child sits the 10 plus exam, to be in with any kind of chance, really, they need to know everything that they would have been taught for primary. So primary curriculum covers a whole suite, you know, but effectively your child should know everything for the following year when they sit the exam in year 5. So the knowledge in their head should cover their entire primary. So they need to be as sharp as a year 6 in July when they sit the exam in November or January of year 5. Okay. So that's the 10 plus. Then we move on to something called the 13 plus. Some parents have been calling and asking me about this 12 plus that they've heard of. There isn't a 12 plus, and I'll explain why. There isn't a 12 plus because grammar schools and independent schools, once they've made their offers to students, they may hold a short waiting list, but if a place becomes available, it's the waiting list students that are called first. They'll only start considering students who are not on the waiting list again only as early as year 8. Like, think about this. You get thousands of children sitting the 11 plus exams. You know, generally it's at least 4 children to one place. In some parts of the country, you're looking at 10 children going for one place. And I'm sure, you know, the stats are just building up every year. I mean, I see it. The number of calls about the 11 plus year on year that we get at Geek School is just increasing, you know. Parents still call up about SATs and GCSEs, but it's almost incomparable. It's quite interesting. But anyway, so there isn't really a 12 plus because obviously in year 7, you know, the children turn 12. They don't really do testing in year 7 because they have a waiting list. But there is something called the 13 plus, which children usually sit that exam in January. Some schools do it a bit earlier. And you have something, and those are independent schools. Grammar schools and state schools, remember that grammar schools are state schools that are selective, okay? So grammar schools do something called the in-year transfer. That's the term for it. So if you're interested in your child moving, you know, maybe from a comprehensive state school or an academy or something into a grammar school, when you call the school up, you need to ask them about the in-year transfer. You know, that's the term that they're likely to understand. Of course, you know, with explanation, they'd understand what you were requesting anyway. But the term for that is the in-year transfer. Okay, so in-year transfer, children generally do a maths and English exam, and schools add different things for different reasons. So some schools will do a verbal reasoning test at 13 plus or in-year transfer stage. You know, so obviously a harder version of what they would have done for the 11 plus. Some schools just do maths and English. Some schools do maths, English and a language. Some schools do maths, English and the sciences, all three of them: biology, chemistry, physics, and so on. So basically, you need to do your research. Contact the school, find out what they base their exam on ahead of time, and you should really start preparing as soon as possible. You know, so because the children sit the exam in January of year 8, it's ideal if you'd start in year 7. If your child didn't make it for the 11 plus, keep the momentum going, because guess what? The standard for the 13 plus is pretty high. You know, children really should be working at GCSE level. That's how competitive some schools are for the 13 plus. Can you imagine that? A year 8, you know, you're literally like 3 years ahead. Wow. You know, but it's doable. I mean, we put quite a lot of children through the 13 plus if they come to us late. I like to get the job done for the 11 plus though, because it just makes life a lot more straightforward. Because imagine looking for, you know, a tutor for languages, a tutor for maths, a tutor for verbal, you know, and so on. It does get quite costly. It's ideal to really get the job done for the 11 plus. And as I always say on this channel, a good way to improve your child's chances is to start in year 4, so that they have enough time to work through everything at their own pace without feeling the pressure of having to cram everything in if they start too late. I think I've covered everything. I really think I've covered everything. I've seen the 16 plus on some school websites. Not really sure why. And the reason why I think that's a bit odd is basically because you can still get into grammar or independent schools after GCSE. So one way of doing that is to score really highly in the GCSE grades. But more importantly for predicted grades, because as we know, those are the grades that go on to any sixth form that parents sort of register their interest in. So that's basically that, really. So I hope that was helpful. Now you know what all the pluses are about. And, you know, please send any questions in the comments and so on. You know that I'm here for you, ready to help with any knowledge that I have of this interesting UK education system. See you later. Bye.